Okay, so we are back live streaming and this is a special council meeting regarding budget. So we're just talking about capital projects and I'm going to turn the floor back over to Brock Corral in regards to lead station 2 and concerns about the new build. Go ahead.
Thank you. And through you, your worship, if I was to take us back to 2022, we were confronted with, at that time, looking at debt of 4.7 million, which included 3 items, which I don't need to get into, but we were looking at 2.5 million for a fire hall, and we were accepting of that. And moving forward, within a year, it had escalated somewhat, and we kind of hummed and hawed, and we were okay. And then we were hit with, right between the eyes, with $6 million for the fire hall. And that's where we are today. I know the easy thing to do is pull out the company credit card and just go, let's go. We were critical of a previous administration that ran down, in our opinion, the discretionary reserves. We talked about that a lot at that very first budget we were on. And here we are. We're not running down reserves because that's going to happen. I see by 2028, 2030, we're in pretty dire straits. But what we have chosen to do is pull out the company credit card. And that company credit card is going to be 15 million. It's just going to, and it seems like overnight we've gone from being quite concerned about running down the reserves to, this is how you deal with it. So with those things said, I would like us, has staff taken the opportunity to go back to the architect and ask, are there some serious cost-cutting measures that could be done on the current plan, or do we need to scrap it and start over? I am not concerned about a delay of 1 year. I am not concerned. Let me repeat that. That doesn't bother me at all. Fire hall number 2 is still functional. We have great volunteer fire people. We have the best equipment money can buy. And yet I don't want to see us rush into something that is a possible regret here. I don't think I'm going to win this argument, but I truly want that to either the architect come up with some real cost cutting, not 10,000, not 50. I'm talking $1 million. This thing has escalated way out of shape. And yet we've sat here and gone, oh, okay, after the initial shock. And I am shocked that we're just sitting here thinking that's okay. This has been in the peak period of interest rates, of market upturns, of inflation, and here we are accepting of that number. And those numbers truly come out of probably the worst economic downturn or escalation we've seen in years and years and years. Let's give this all a time to chill. Let's let that market sort itself, because I know there are people saying, well, this thing could cost us more next year. It could cost us less. Because those companies might go, oh, these people are serious. They want us to kind of sharpen the pencil and get it on a piece of paper. So I would like to see us either get some real cost reduction or cancel that bid and start over. Thank you.
I guess I'll let Councillor Lackey go, and then I'll have Director Holiday and the fire chief speak to it in general. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I would agree. I think the whole time that we've been looking at these design plans and wish lists, and it was all based on the premise that we had in our head of a certain dollar value. And we said, oh, this is great. Wow, we can do this for this much money, when in fact, we looked at this and started making some unconscious decisions that it was okay because this was the direction that we were sent. And in fact, it's not. So to me, it's a whole different mindset when all of a sudden we're at 6.8 and it's, wow, no, not at all. I think if we went back with the budget that we would like to see, and let's see what kind of fire station we can get for that money would perhaps be a better way to go. I'm with Councillor Grell that I'm not in favor of option one, the status quo here. There's got to be a redesign to what we can afford, or a retender. There's got to be some sort of reality check.
Okay, so to the questions that have been posed in regards to redesign or to go back to the architect and take out some major cost cutting, I think there was some discussion about this previously, but obviously we need to reiterate it one way or the other.
Thank you, Your Worship. So back in 2022, I had brought a report through to council after going on a tour and looking at some fire halls that had been constructed in the area. We'd established that we were looking at a 10,000 square foot facility, and based on those cost estimates, we're looking at about $300 a square foot. You know, as we progressed through the design, we saw that the costs were rising. We had some rough cost estimates completed by the cost consultant who was engaged as part of this project. And in April of 2023, we brought another report to council with those, as a result of those concerns, where we said we need to look at some cost saving measures at that point. And when we did, we brought a list of items, you know, equipment like bunker gear, the lockers, the commercial kitchen, the range, the deep fryer, the SCBA, compressor and filling station. We looked at the generator and the fire water tank, and we looked at the mezzanine. Now, some of these items, when we had this discussion, we realized because it is a post-disaster facility, we couldn't remove. But we did remove the remainder. And as a result, we took the building from 10,000 square feet down to 8,800 square feet. And it was a challenge for us to fit what we were still trying to achieve within that footprint. And when we spoke with the consultant at that time, they said, it doesn't matter what we do with the footprint anymore. You're not going to see the savings because everything that you're looking for, it costs money. So we were able to achieve in 20 or 1,200 less square feet, everything that we were looking for, except for some of the appurtenances that we were looking for afterwards. We said, we spoke with fire and we agreed that these are things that we could build on in the future. The idea was to get the general structure in place, and anything that could be added afterwards would be added afterwards. We came with a design after that in the fall that we had included a flat top roof. And there were concerns about us having a flat top roof, but at the same time, we needed to be able to fill that fire water storage tank, because that is a requirement not only for firefighting exercises, but also for the facility itself. Because it is post-disaster, we do have to have that water availability for fighting the fire of the facility itself. So at that point, there were concerns with having a flat top roof. So we had to go back to the drawing board and come back with a steel roof that still captured all of the rainwater as required. And there were concerns that there were going to be some elevated costs as a result of that. But we were comfortable with that. So we proceeded with the design. So the tender closed, and we were surprised as anybody else that it came in at $750 a square feet. But when I provided examples in the report, we found that our cost estimates were really consistent with other fire halls that were being constructed to the same standard. I did provide one that was a lesser standard in that. And I honestly, from looking at the design of that, I'm not sure how it actually meets the requirements for post-disaster. A pond provided on site is not sufficient for firefighter services in the wintertime. It's a wooden frame building. It's single bay deep. It's, forced air. I don't know that it meets the requirements for the amount of washrooms that you have for a training space. There's some questions in terms of what we're comparing ourselves to with this when we're trying to build something for the future. But with that being said, we closed the tender. The numbers came in a bit higher, and it was asked upon me to reach out to the consultant to see if there were any cost saving measures. And I did. And I received a list back from them of some of the potential cost saving measures. And they add up to $140,000, because the feeling is that we have absolutely scaled everything out. We are paying a little bit more for certain things like the HVAC by going with a hydronic system instead of forced air. But the life cycle costing of that will result in somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 savings over the life cycle of that facility. Everything else is basic. We had our marching orders for the training center requirements, the office requirements, the apparatus bay requirements, and I feel that we met all of those standards. We're building a facility that is low maintenance. It'll last as long as we're looking for it to last. It'll be functional for as long as we're looking at it to be functional. Some of the cost saving measures that were provided is removing of screen fencing, removing all of the landscaping additions, removing the lockers, changing the siding to a more cost-effective material, changing out some of the window treatments that are included, and then reducing the electrical lighting. And that adds up to $140,000. And that's what they feel would be our cost-saving measures as a result of this.
Just to further that, if we were to change anything more on it, it would change the overall design of the building, and then it would have to go back to square one. Is that what I'm reading between the lines?
That is any changes, any major changes that we're looking at this facility, not only would it change the design, but we might not get the same bidders. We received 13 bidders on this. It was a wide range of bids that we received, from $5.8 to $8.7 million. If we say to them, we're canceling this contract and we're going back to the drawing board, those same bidders may not bid again as a result of this, and we might end up paying more money for a lesser facility at the end of the day.
Okay, so I think that answers the question about reaching out to the designer in regards to cost savings. As far as having further discussion on said cost savings, is there any appetite for that, or? I'll have Councillor or Deputy Mayor Fody and then Councillor maybe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship, through you. Just as a reminder, you said you were gonna have the chief speak after the Director of Operations, or?
Yeah.
I will gladly succeed to that if you wish.
Okay, so if the chief would like to speak to perhaps any of the suggestions for reduction, or how that may affect things in the short term or the long term.
Through your worship. So in speaking with Director Holiday and listening to councillors' concerns, a couple of parts I want to have a couple conversations about. It's very similar to our boat conversation earlier. The building that we're in currently, 2-3 weeks ago, we had a 4-day stint where we couldn't actually pull a pumper truck out of the fire hall because we lost a door. Most of those doors and the openers, are 2 of the 3, have failed. We've changed the openers on them, tried to make them more current. Last year we had a door come right down and smash in half, so we lost most of the door for 2 or 3 days. And then the same thing happened a couple of weeks ago where I had service guys in on our trucks. They went to put the door down, and the door fell from about 5 feet. Luckily, nobody was under it and got hurt. But these doors are ancient, and trying to find parts for them is almost impossible. And then we keep changing doors. So we're working with a building that's 70 years old. We basically shoehorn the trucks in and out. So yes, we can make it happen, but we also have very expensive pieces of equipment in there. And if my tanker's not full of water, it hits the top of the door. The day the brand new fire truck comes, it drags its license plate across Main Street because it's such a steep incline to get in and out of that building. So yes, it's working, but just barely. So that's one of the issues we have. We have 1 washroom within that facility. That station has the most females in it as well. So we have 1 washroom, 1 shower, none of which are suitable for using very much in the event that we have something happen there. We've definitely made the best of that situation as long as we can. Looking at what's happened, and further to Director Holiday's conversation, very early on in the stages of this design, I took it to my station captain at the time, and he took it to his firefighters to talk about, how can we make things affordable? How can we do this? How can we do that? And one of their biggest ideas was the washroom where where we have males and females with the full door. So we have the gender neutral bathroom in that, which saved us about 6 different water closets as well, because that cut down that size pulled a lot out of that, which helped us reduce our size down that 1,000+ square feet. So they're involved in that, and they're very excited. And anybody who's been in Station 2 in the last year, it's well kept clean as well as we can. It's as tidy as we can keep a 70-year-old building, and as neat as we can keep it. But it's a 70-year-old building that's starting to come apart for us as well. One of the things that we had to relocate that truck and put it in somebody's driveway for 4 days, just so that we could at least have a response out of that station for tankers and pumpers. So we had to move trucks around, which there's only certain bays we can put certain trucks in, because the whole air handling unit hangs down so far, we can't get the truck all the way in and shut the door. So we had to move a tanker out and move it to a personal residence just to cover. So a few other things with looking at the new building, we put this in, and as Director Holiday said, this is our secondary EOC as well as a post-disaster building. It pulls the secondary EOC out of the village, because right now the one EOC is this building and the other EOC is the Jesse Street, which if in the event that something happens, we don't have either if it's a large enough event. So that helps us to get that. That's one reason we have that training room the way it is. The other thing is our firefighters currently have to leave that station to go train wherever we go train. They have to pull the truck out to do anything more than ropes and knots behind the truck. They can't do any ladder training on it. They don't even have a room to actually do training in unless they go up into the community building. So, we've tried to design that station so that they have the ability to do their training in it. They have the ability to train on site, so they're not pulling that equipment out of that part of the township to work with the other. Now, we do also bring fire stations in from 2 and 4, or from 3 and 4 to work with them, same as we move them all around. So we try to bring them to different stations just to try to get them to all work together, and that would alleviate some of that problem that we have. They can never host that training, which is challenging for them as well, right? We've looked at how we can do as much green work on it as we can by collecting all the groundwater from the roof and all the water from the runoff, and it all goes into the tank. And as Director Holiday mentioned, this is a requirement under the OEC. It also helps us in firefighting tactics, because then we have at least a spot we can fill a couple loads of water loads of tankers to take out of that hall as well. Once again, the new building is designed so a drive-through feature, so that we can actually bring our trucks in. We're not backing into the halls. The way the trucks are laid out and the hall is laid out, we enter into that hall into the truck bay portion. So we're not walking out in front of the trucks that are leaving for the hall. If you check this hall out here, the front door is the one that most people come in. They walk through in front of trucks to try while the trucks are trying to get out. So it's all about the safety. So we've tried to design it such that we make it safe for our firefighters, and that's where the clean rooms come in. That's where the fill stations and the wash stations for the equipment is as well. We don't have that in any other station. So that's why we are coming to council for clean rooms at this station. Why we're looking to try to make these buildings right the first time, instead of trying to have to add pieces to them 10 and 12 years later.
Okay. So Councillor Fody and then Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I agree with a lot of things that my fellow councillors have said, but I have a different outlook on it. And I'll repeat some of what I've said before. In a perfect world, this fire hall would have been changed by previous councils. For whatever reason, they chose not to. Didn't have the funding, didn't want to make it happen. We don't know. We can't change that. This fire hall's been dated for a number of years. And examples the chief just gave, it's starting to now come to fruition as to how old. I was not any more pleased than anybody else on council when we saw the current bid price. The only thing that gave me comfort when I read that, and I said this at the last meeting, if that lowest bidder was supposedly gouging or overpricing, why didn't the other 12 come underneath them? These people all had the same parameters with the very same information, and yet we come in at 6.8 million, well, 5.8, I should say, up to basically 8.8. There's a $3 million swing. Nobody swung the other way. Nobody came in at 2.8. This is today's reality. As Director Holiday has said, we started out at $250 or $300 a square foot. Now we're up to $800. It's reflective in today's housing. I, thank goodness, don't have to build a house today, but unfortunately there are people that are. There's many that would like to. And because of this reality, they can't. My biggest take is I don't want to lose the engineers and the drawings we had from the engineers. If we go back to square one, that's all blowing money. It's just plain wasted. It may be small potatoes in the bigger scheme of things. I am not convinced we're going to come in at a similar building at less money. I'm absolutely not convinced of that. What I would like to entertain, and that was my thought coming here today, Councillor Grell had mentioned about the elephant in the room, and it certainly is. If we borrow $7 million, we're going to pay back 14. Would we be so keen at building a fire hall at $14 million? Because that's really what we're talking about. My thought was we'd come back today and see if we could twist Phil's arm, so to speak, to say, could we put half of the money coming in from casino revenue over toward immediate debts and keep doing so until they're paid off, and take the lowest hanging fruit first, which is a fire truck. A couple of shots on that and it'd be paid off, and then work at Ivy Lee Dock and so on, whatever it is we may finance. We're in tough times. There's no question about it. We're going to be in a lot tougher times if we haven't got a fire hall for our residents out there, because they'll be picking up the tab through their insurance premiums. I don't have the answer, but I'm willing to go forward on some level of financing if we can find it. Thank you.
Councillor Maybe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you. Construction costs have gone up regardless. And to think that our estimated cost when we first started talking about this was going to be what it was going to be, not even the question, because I deal with construction quite often and I see the costs just go up, but we can't change that. And is it going to go down? Marginally, but not enough to really worry about. Secondly, redo costs. If we scrap what we have and go into a redo, we have the architects, engineers, let alone probably redesign on the actual property itself. And then we're going to end up with a fire station that may be much smaller, maybe a little bit more palatable. But by the time you get all the redo fees in, we're going to be right where we are. I don't see a lot of difference in the costs in the end. And similar to Councillor Fody, yeah, we're going to pay for it. And it may be a lot more than what we're actually seeing because of interests and carryover costs and such. But it is a needed asset for our township to continue servicing our residents with safety. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Lackey, go ahead.
Thanks again, Your Worship, and through you. There's no doubt in my mind, I would not like to see fire services in that building any longer than they need to remain. But that's not why we're here. We're trying to get them into a new one as best we can. And I just think that we need to work a little harder to get them into that new facility. And I'm just going back and looking at the design, and I think we have as much square foot outside of the garage. It looks like we're doing double bays, triple wide. This is a big building. And again, for the equipment, the trucks, but we look at the other side, and if you look at the square footage, it's not much different. So it looks like we've got a lot of admin portion to this, as much as we have for equipment. I generally think overall could be scaled down. Let's build what we need, not what we want. There's always room further down the road. If there's such a grand need for something, we've got the property, we've got, you know, ways to put additions on. I hate to use that term, but you know what? Let's get them in, get them safe, get people what they need. We can worry about the trinkets later on, but this is a big station.
Okay, so are there any other comments or questions to be asked of the director or the fire chief? This decision is not being made today. This is being made on Monday evening. At this point, the council the notification went out about an hour ago for that meeting. So I think personally, I'd like to talk about the next few slides, which is about debt and financial planning, because I think it will tie into some of the questions and comments made by councillors and the deputy mayor here today, which will help inform decisions Monday evening. Go ahead, Phil. Oh,
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
wait, she's just trying to get it up on the screen. Okay.
Just skip the slide 94.
Patience, your patience is appreciated.
Back.
There we go.
Perfect. Okay, so thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'll just discuss the 10-year capital financial plan that's included in the budget binder. So the discussion in the binder starts on page 65. The detailed complete plan is Appendix C or tab 8 in the binder, for people that did want to pull that up. So this is the 10-year capital financial plan projections. So overall, the 10-year capital plan, it's comprised of 6 components, which I'll discuss in the following slides. The capital requirements, the funding strategy, debt, our reserve fund continuities, the contributions from operating to the reserve funds, and then conclude with the impact on the future tax levy requirements. So this graph here, high level, shows the capital requirement each year, and we're looking at the 2024 to 2033. So this is the next 10 years. And looks at the capital requirement each year to complete the annual contributions. So the blue line you can see there is the requirement. The orange line there is the projected annual contributions to the capital reserve funds. So you can see there that there is a funding gap. Important to keep in mind when we do look at this 10-year plan, that the later years in the projection definitely carry greater uncertainty. There's many underlying estimates and assumptions built into this. And I would just say it just reinforces the importance of the asset management program and how we have come along in the last few years. But even going forward with the next update and the update after that, it just refines the data that's going into the plan and creating better long-term financial planning. So those are kind of my caveats for the high-level 10-year projection. But overall, on the 10-year high level, the total capital reserve funds at the end of 2024 would projected to have a balance of about 3.4 million. And by the end of this 10 years, it would be up to about 7.9. But if you look at it, which is great, but the years 2027 to 2029, it is projected that the reserves would dip into a negative balance. So it is definitely not a smooth transition. These next 4 to 5 years in capital, I guess could best be described as a hump that we need to get over if we're going to make the necessary investments into our capital infrastructure. Overall, high level, the goal is to get the township to a position where, generally speaking, we're funding capital on a pay-as-you-go. Therefore, what we're putting in each year is funding what the capital requirements, and the capital reserve funds are really used to help stabilize that from year to year, because there will be fluctuations from year to year, but overall that would help to stabilize it for larger projects. Next slide. So the first component of the capital plan is the capital requirements. So you can see over the next 10 years, there is about 60 million in capital replacement required, or that works out to about a $6 million annual average. Obviously, there's fluctuations from year to year. As you can see, in some of the later years, the actual capital requirement is quite low. It is important to point out that this capital requirement is based on the asset management plan and program, which is based on capital replacement. So outside of that, if there are additional net new projects that are added over this time frame, there would be need to be additional funding to go with that. This is really about replacing our current capital assets. So looking at the capital requirements, I kind of spoke to it earlier, but the primary asset categories driving this requirement is the road network of about 25.5 million, building and facilities about 17.6 million, about 13 million in fleet. And those three categories combined makes up about 93% of the total requirement. So that's just to provide some context. So, oh, I deleted the number in the middle, but how are we going to fund that 60 million over the 10 years? So you can see through this slide, the primary source of funding is the Capital Reserve Fund, which is about 62% of the total funding, which are the contributions from the operating fund, which directly impacts our levy requirement and our tax rate each year. So if you combine this with the debt servicing, which is also levy requirement driven, that equals about 78% of the total funding for this capital requirement is going to come through that operating fund. Other notable funding sources in here, we do have the OCIF. So we do receive an annual allocation. This comes from the province, and that will be allocated annually towards road projects. We also have the CCBF, or the Fed gas tax, of about 2.5 million over the next 10 years, and that's from the federal government. And generally speaking, the amounts may fluctuate, but they are pretty stable funding sources. We do have debt in there of the 9.6. I would say that, just context, that is over the 24 to 2033 period. You do need to also include the previous carry forward budget and the Ivy Lee and the pumper that were done. So overall, it is about $15.5 million if you include those in potential projected debt over this time frame. And I'll discuss that on the next slide. So debt, obviously a hot topic of conversation. So based on the previous funding plan that was brought in 2023, as well as this funding plan, there are four potential projects. As I said earlier, the Ivy Lee Wharf and the fire pumper, we have built that into the budget in 2024, that we do expect that we'll have to service that debt by Q3. So about 50% of its annual requirement is in the 2024 operating budget. So based on the this plan, unchanged, if outside of the projects we've talked about, there is the wharf, the truck, and the fire station 2, you will see there is new fire station number 4. This was based on the financial plan that was presented last year at 2023. This item was in there as a potential projected project for 2030. I do want to just say this, including this in the 10-year plan is in no way an endorsement. It was in there. We left it unchanged from the amount. I would expect it to change, but we didn't want to take it completely out because we wanted to factor some level of potential in there for the future so that you can have a more full context picture. So again, obviously the big number is the fire station 2 of potentially 6.8. I would say that the debt estimates that we've used are based on current lending rates from Infrastructure Ontario of about 5%. And they're over 30-year terms, or in the case of the pumper truck, 20-year terms. That's not to say that we're going to take out debt where we're going to be locking in 5% for 30 years. Hopefully the rates will go down, and in future years we can secure refinancing at lower rates.
Sorry, just for clarity, I thought IO was a fixed rate. I didn't think it floated.
Yeah, so we're not required to we use the IO rate as a general rate to use for the estimates. We don't have to borrow from IO. We can go out to any bank.
Lending institution.
Well, any big 5 bank, not any lending institution. We are prescribed in the Municipal Act.
Yeah.
But any of the big banks we can borrow from. It doesn't have to
And
be
do
IO.
we have a credit facility at our current bank, which is Bank of Montreal?
We do have the current loan outstanding is through our credit facility. We do also have a temporary borrowing bylaw, which you'll see coming in January. Right now, that's at $1 million, and you can really think of that. That's more of like an overdraft based on cash flows throughout the year.
Mhm.
But we do have that. So, but we would definitely certainly go out with any debt, would need a borrowing bylaw, and we would definitely be taking that to market to secure the best terms that we could.
Right.
The idea in building the financial plan is to be as conservative as possible, to present this picture, and hopefully over time it would be less, but we did want to be conservative in our estimates. And just for some context, municipalities are governed through our annual repayment limit under the Municipal Act. So we are governed and legislated how much we can borrow against our own net revenues. So that's set at 25%. Currently, we have very, very minimal debt. Even if all this debt was to come out at this annual repayment, and we'll see later in the water, there is projected a bit of debt in potential water projects as well. All that combined, at our current annual repayment limit, we'd be at 33% of our limit. And that would obviously increase in future years as our own source revenues go up as well. So from an overall debt capacity point of view, in terms of the legislation, we are still well within any prescribed amount. That's not to say that's the appetite of council necessarily, but legislatively speaking, we are more than well within our legislative range of what we can take on. So I did want to make that point as well.
And that also assumes that we replace Station 4 in 20, what was the date on that?
It was in there as 2030, meaning that debt would potentially be
Hit
realized
then.
in 2031,
Okay.
but yes.
Okay, thank you.
So this is for the capital reserve fund continuities. So the red line on this slide is the withdrawals in any given year, and the green line there represents the contributions from operating. So you can see that up until 2030, the projected withdrawals are greater than the contributions every year. As a result, the blue line goes down to basically being at nothing by 2027 and into a negative balance in 28 and 29 before rebounding in future years. So based on that, for the years that it does project it to go negative, the options available at that time would be we could increase the contributions to our reserve funds further than what we've proposed for our planning, which would obviously have a direct impact on the tax levy requirement. Hopefully, we could secure grant opportunities that are currently identified, and we're always working towards securing grants from senior levels of government. We could look at short-term borrowing needs to meet our temporary cash flow needs for those couple of years rather than taking a long-term. Or we defer some projects in those years potentially to later years when we do have the sufficient capital reserve funds. So, I mean, there are options available, but based on the plan, this is kind of the ups and downs, and it kind of highlights the need of the capital reserve funds that hopefully will get to the point where they do stabilize and you do have the ebbs and flows, but overall, over the long term, that it will be able to fund our capital requirements. So contributions from operating to capital reserves. So this year, the financial plan does propose significant increases for each of the next 5 years. There's just no way around that based on the capital infrastructure that's being identified. Beginning in 2029, these increases would level off to a more modest 2.5%. If we look at it over the 10 years, the contributions are projected to increase from about 2.6 million in 2024 to about 4.8 million by 2033. But keep in mind, earlier I mentioned over this 10 years, the average annual capital requirement is 6 million. So we would be getting to that point where we are getting to that pay-as-you-go level. And on the next slide, I'll speak to that, where it kind of gets to a stable levy increase each year that we could dedicate to capital. You will notice in the plan that there is in 2031, I did just want to highlight that it's proposed that there would be no increase to the contribution to reserve fund. And this was an acknowledgement of the potential if there was that fire hall too, because there was potential debt servicing coming on that year. So overall, based on the prior increases, we would have sufficient reserve funds. If you look at it overall through the 10-year context, it averages out to, oh, I'm thinking of the next slide. Sorry, getting ahead of myself. So yeah, maybe we'll move to the next slide. So how does all this impact our tax levy requirement and the tax rate to residents? You can see this year, it equates to about a 3.5%. And that's the combination there of the average tax rate impact as well as potential debt. So this levy impact requirement is the contribution to reserves as well as the annual debt servicing projections. Combined, this is how they impact the tax levy requirement. Based on our assessment this year, every 1% is about $113,000. That's about 1% now. If you look at it over the red dashed line there is that over the 10 years, it averages out to about 3%. Now, obviously, up until 2028, it's above that line. And that was the hump I was speaking about earlier. After this, we get to those more modest 2.5%, which equates to about a 1% levy increase. So the goal is that within 5 years, our capital infrastructure would be at a point where we could have a stable 1% annual increase dedicated to capital infrastructure and would be stabilized. And that's kind of the goal of this projection, is getting to that point. And we would be there around 2029. But there's no way around it in the next 5 years. Like there is potential for significant tax levy impacts, but.
So just for my own clarity, based on the previous conversation about the casino dollars that are coming in, not the taxation, the other money, that is factored into the contributions to our operating budget, or it's not?
That is not factored in. So for context, this year, like the net casino revenue impact is from the operating side is $650,000 this year after the transfer to the special project reserve. So if we did want to earmark that, we can, but that would equate to about a 6% tax rate impact, right? If we were to allocate it specifically to the capital reserve.
But I guess what I'm saying is the overage of the revenue that we haven't budgeted for continues to go into reserves over and above what we've dedicated, correct? Do you see what so if we're only budgeting for, in this particular budget, $850,000 that's coming in from the casino, but we know that it's $1 million plus.
This year, yes. So we do have a surplus allocation policy. So at year end, we do have a policy that says that any surplus from our year is split 50-50 between the working fund and the contingency fund. That is something that I spoke earlier about possibly bringing some updates to our reserve fund policy. The surplus allocation would be something where you could earmark, if there are surpluses in years, to contribute that directly to capital reserve funds, as if that is a need, which it is.
So in the regards of Deputy Mayor Fode's comment, while it has to go into capital based on the current policy, because your comment, Deputy Mayor, was about applying that to debt to pay it down fast, or half of it. Not to say that we may be able to change the policy to that effect. I don't know. That's maybe something we can talk about. The reason I bring that up is because currently the way it sits right now, it's not possible to do what you're asking. But that being said, any surplus funds that are coming in that are not budgeted for are not evaporating. They're there, they're overfunding our capital reserves or contingency or whatever.
Yeah, they get split 50-50 to the working fund and the contingency reserve.
Right.
Per the policy currently. That's not to say at year end, when we do bring 2023 statements, council could make a motion that maybe you do want to
capital.
allocate some of any potential surplus directly into capital rather than those reserve funds, for sure. So,
Which would then potentially reduce the need to borrow if we had more capital over time.
yes.
Councillor,
Just,
go ahead.
I feel compelled to step in and say that's all good. That's all good and fine. Except when I look at the potential of fire hall number 4 written here, and it's not the current, I understand it comes from previous year, but it's $5.2 million. $5 $5.2 million wouldn't even build the one we're talking about today. So how can it possibly be even close to correct? So even though if we said, well, we're going to use the casino funds to pay off debt, that is going to be a much higher number given on everything we've learned today. 5.2, looking at fire station number 4 in the year 2028 is a myth.
Well, I think that there's also a subsequent conversation that has to be had about Fire Station 4. So, well, no, I mean, from a location point of view, we're building a brand new fire station that's 6 kilometers closer to Station 4. So where it exists right now, does it make sense? Does it make sense to rebuild there? Do we need to rebuild something smaller somewhere else? Do we need to have it at all? Like, I think that there's some major conversations that have to happen about Station 4, and not that I'm in favor of one way or another, because I certainly don't have the information, but it's in the projected asset management plan because it exists now, and its life expectancy is done in 2031. That doesn't mean we're going to be rebuilding it. That's the way it is in the plan. I know, but this is the best. I look back to when we started we started at this table minus Ms. Kelman. We didn't have any of this projected stuff. We were just throwing darts at a dartboard. And it's painful. Don't get me wrong. Looking at this is, makes me break out in hives too. But I guess it's much better information to have to work with now than what we had before. And at least puts us in a bit of a better position. So it's certainly not perfect, but I have Deputy Mayor Lackey and then Councillor Jameson.
Deputy
Oh.
Mayor Fody.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's a long
I'm
afternoon.
confused. You.
It's
You.
a long afternoon. To Councillor Grell's point, I don't even look at fire station number. Now I'm lost. Fire station 4. To me, I drive by fire station 1 in Rideau Lakes often. It's about as new as that one is. I think we need to talk to our neighbors. If they want to build a fire, we're getting a little off topic here. Our neighbors aren't even here to defend themselves or to swing at me. But that's a totally different discussion. Fire station number 4. I think we could look at something much, much different involving more than one municipality and see where that ends up. That out of the equation. I want to go back to Phil's graph here on page 67.
67.
And it made me realize as Phil was talking, looking at this graph, maybe it's kind of like driving to Toronto. We don't drive to Gananoque and check our odometer and check our gas, and we don't drive to Belleville and Napanee and check it again and so on. Maybe we should be looking at this picture, the 10-year picture. And then it doesn't make the debt any less, and none of us are going to like it anymore. But if you look at the 10-year picture of $60 million, and this is how it's going to get paid for, the fraction of debt is much, much less than the bigger picture as a whole. And if we're going to use the asset management plan, which we all agree, I doubt there's a naysayer around the table on the asset management plan, it alleviates the throwing darts in the air. But maybe this is what we should focus on. And then, no, we're not going to pay any less debt. We're still going to pay. But the bigger goal may be the whole idea. It's like a football game. It isn't the first down of the second. It's when the buzzer goes off at the end of the fourth quarter. Now see where we are. Maybe that's what we should concentrate on.
Councillor Jameson, go ahead.
Just on the general point about asset management plan that we have before us. And I agree the comment that Councillor Gorell made much earlier about reserves being pretty much gutted, just stability of the place. But in fact, the swamp was drained, but the alligators were left. I'm sure even an economist can understand that you've got to deal with the alligators. So it comes to us. It comes to us. And what we need to look at, I think, when we're dealing with a fire station, we're not all agreeing on what it should happen at this moment, is that at this moment in time, if we can take on what we know a cost is. In other words, what we know we can do now, the money we have, so that with the information we have, we need to trust the people we've hired, and we've hired extremely good people to move us down the road. We can't project, rightly so, that the cost of Fire Station 4 will be as little money as it's showing there. But we can make an assumption about how thoughtful the discussion can be early, as opposed to we're having discussions about getting rid of the alligators we inherited, as opposed to let's avoid putting more in the swamp down the road. And so the political will here is interesting. So this is what I'm ruminating upon, is we got to be a little on the brave side, because that's our obligation to our residents. And when I think about the fire hall, no matter what we do, if we don't move down the road with what we have, it'll be 3 or 4, 5 years, just because of the way this machinery works. And the health and security of the people I live with, including me, is of great concern to me. And that, as the chief pointed out, is not working. That place is not working. He's painting a positive picture about that building. It is not working. So we need to move as quickly as we can with what we know. And then we've been actually given a gift. We don't have to fight about gold-plated pickleball courts, because we just can't afford to do it. But we can discuss what we really need to do, and we have the people on board that I think can get us there for the long term. So I think if we apply a little political will now, the people that succeed us in these roles, and ultimately somebody will thank us. But if we kick that can down the road to them, that is my big worry, that we have undermined the confidence of our residents, and we have not achieved what this asset management plan has told us to do. And that's where I'm at in all the discussion about money. I think we can figure it out. And I'm going to make one more point about economic development, because I went to music school. I know all about economic development. The reality is, if the roads are really good and the emergency services are really responsive, people are going to build in your community. That is the thing I know we thought about when we moved here only 14 years ago, is, are the services adequate to the needs of our small family unit? And I really do believe that good roads and responsive services are the things that will delineate us from some other municipalities that, and we know one near us, Angie and I know one near us, that they're at war with each other over nothing. So I think it's going to require some political will, but I really have confidence in the people that we actually did the hiring. This team we have, we brought to the table. So I'd like to go down the road with this budget, because I think it's going to do the job. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll let, Counselor, no, you're good? Oh, okay, so Counselor maybe, and then I think we're gonna get going with water and wastewater, so that we can, unless there's any new information that anybody wants to debate about what we've been talking about. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just wondering on slide 99 there, reserve fund.
Continuity.
Yeah, that's it. Sorry. I was wondering if our current impact is what we're basing this on, or is there any future impact adjustment that's going to change that graph?
It's page 69 in your budget binder.
Yeah, so this reserve fund continuity table is based on the plan increases to the contribution to capital, which is number 5, I believe, contributions from operating. So we're proposing the 12, 13, 15 and that increase. So based on that and what would have to come out to fund potential future, that's what this is.
But it
based on.
doesn't take in, so your question is about about the actual impact assessment and as that grows. Well, I think it's a premature question you're asking about potential tax increases to fund the capital that is increasing, and that is definitely a dartboard conversation. But it factors in that there will be some growth, and that growth will take into account. Now, as of right now, it's all on us to do tax rate increases because we have no phase-in assessment from impact, so. No. It doesn't reflect what
Yeah.
the future increases are gonna be.
Yeah, so I would say on the last slide, the levy impact, those are the percentage increases of what it would impact our levy requirement. Now, whether that levy requirement is funded in a combination of increased assessment versus tax rate, that's for the future to tell, I guess.
Cause this year was 0.5%.
Yeah, this year worked out to about 0.5%. Like I said, it was a 6.2 levy increase, but we only needed a 5.6 tax rate to
increase.
achieve that. And that's due to the assessment.
And keep in mind, we will have a commercial hotel that'll start to pay taxes within 2 years. We will have Huck's development likely at that point in time. So there will be increases to, which will be fairly significant to, I know that it's only $20 million up until now, but those developments are a lot more. That's a commercial tax increase because that's really residential more than anything, but that hotel will be a significant increase to taxation, so comparatively. Okay, so with that, I think we'll move on to water, wastewater, if everybody's okay with that, to get through that piece. So sorry, before we go on to water, wastewater, I'm gonna reread the motion. The gist of it is the motion, if you don't remember what I read, was that we're receiving these budget reports and that the 2024 municipal operating capital budgets as presented be referred to the January 8th, 2024 committee of the whole meeting for consideration. So based on the motion that's at hand that was put on the table before we started talking about budget, this no approvals on budget would happen until the January 8th meeting. However, the tender decision about Station 2 will be made on Monday night, one way or the other, because the tender either has to be awarded or closed one way. Okay. So the motion, I'll read it in its entirety. Moved by Deputy Mayor Fody, seconded by Councillor Maybe, that the council receive corporate budget services report SR-204-23-2024 draft municipal operating and capital budgets. And that council receive the 2024 proposed operating budget with a net levy requirement of $11,974,400. And that the council receive the 2024 township residential property tax rate of 0.00504751. And that council received the 2024 proposed capital budget of $10,208,900. And that the 2024 municipal operating capital budgets as presented be referred to the January 8th, 2024 committee of the whole meeting for consideration. So as the motion has been on the floor all through our budget presentation, I will call a question. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it is carried. So we will make the decision on final budget come January 8th. Next item is moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by. It's committee of the whole. It's committee of the whole. That the 16th is council. Correct.
I'm sure there's like a green.
Okay.
Oh.
So we'll still have the ability for, but it's a good point to make because committee of the whole is open for the public. So if anybody wants to come and ask any further questions about budget, that's where they would do it, is at the January 8th meeting. Okay. Next motion is Councillor Jameson, seconded by Deputy Mayor Fody, that the council receive the corporate services report SR-205-23-2024 draft water and wastewater operating and capital budgets. The council received the 2024 proposed water operating budget of $354,600, and the council received the 2024 proposed wastewater operating budget of $333,500, and that council received the water wastewater capital budget of $2,835,000. And that the 2024 water wastewater operating and capital budgets as presented be referred to the January 8th committee of the whole meeting for consideration and the council approve increases to water and wastewater rates in accordance with the rate study effective for the January billing cycle. So the motion is on the floor. So Phil, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So almost in the home stretch here. So the 2024 water and wastewater, we'll start with operating and then we'll go into the capital budget. So the operating budgets for water and wastewater, it's a slight increase. If you look at the net expenditures, it's up about 4% over last year. And the majority of that is transfers to reserve funds. Just for context, the transfer to reserve funds within the water and wastewater, it's really the residual amount based on the total revenue raised minus all the expenses. The residual amount gets transferred to the reserve. And then we do use that for capital going forward. We have increased the user fees, the base fee by 3.5%, or we're proposing to, which I'll get to in a few slides. And you can see that, and that is in agreement with the previous rate study that was previously approved by council. So we have not veered from that course. Overall expenses, the main expense is the Aqua contract to just manage our water and wastewater facilities for us. They have provided us with, based on our agreement, there's a 3% increase based on CPI for next year. In terms of maintenance, this is actually down in 2024, and this is based on a maintenance schedule provided by Aqua, and that is included in Appendix D. Hopefully I said that right. With the water and wastewater plan, there is a chart after that, which is provided by Aqua, which provides a 10-year projected maintenance schedule for the facilities. And then there is some insurance expense as well as some other supplies and expenses. So overall, the combined water and wastewater is just under 700,000, which is a combined $26,000 increase over last year, or about 4%. So the main changes there, the slide summarizes it, broken down by water and wastewater. So the user fee revenue under each of the systems is up 13,000 and 12,000 respectively, and that's based on that 3.5% increase to the base rate charge. The Aqua contracts is up in each one as well, like I said previously, based on 3% in CPI. The maintenance contract, as provided by Aqua for maintenance work in the facilities. Reminder that this is based on their projected schedule and its budget year over year. So we are still doing maintenance work. It ebbs and flows. And then the residual amount at the end of the day is what goes into the reserve fund. So you can see the maintenance expense is down, but then that's made up by an increased transfer to the reserve funds. And that's kind of how the water and wastewater systems are set up. So our user rates, based on the last rate study, we are proposing that the water and the wastewater flat fees increase by 3.5%. Do want to emphasize that the flat monthly charge does include 15 cubic meters of water and wastewater. So overall, the vast majority of users are the 1.5 inch meter or less. That is the primary majority of our users. Combined, that would be an extra $5.66 a month in the flat rate. And then there is some minimal increases as well to the volume charge, that if they do use more than 15 cubic meters in a month, there is a slight increase of 3 cents on the water, and the wastewater is actually remaining flat. So those are the proposed rates that we are asking council to approve, and that would be effective for the January billing cycle.
Okay, questions in regards to water, wastewater? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Fody.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you to our Director of Operations. As who I have this question for, Phil. I can't help but think when I read this, our user fees are up for water and wastewater. What's the odds of that being directly related to the new meters?
Thank you, through your worship. When I first started here, I believe we were looking at 40% of the meters were, I'm looking at the deputy treasurer as I asked this question. I think we were looking at about 40% of the meters that were not responding at the time.
Yeah.
I'm corrected. We had 40% of the meters that were working at the time when I first got here, meaning that not only were we unable to account for how much water people were using, we were also unable to better assess whether we had a loss within the system. So now we can accurately track, what are the amount of water that we're pumping into the system versus how much is coming out through the lagoon system as well at this point. So we're getting much better data. But I think that what you're seeing with the increase in rates is as a result of having good data coming out of those meters now.
Thank you.
Sorry, got to get my necklace up. Anyways, is there any other questions? I know that the rate is based off of, as the treasurer said, our previously approved rate study that was done. Was it 10 years or 5 years? 10?
So 5.
5?
Sorry,
I asked the question.
it provided a 10-year projection, but the rates are for 5 years.
Right, and we're coming up on the 5 years here soon. are we not?
The next rate study would happen in 2025 for rates beginning in 2026.
Got
And
it.
that's under the Safe Drinking Water Act. That's a
Okay,
requirement.
so we've got another year before we have to engage another, well, it would be engaged in 2025,
We
right?
would be doing the work in 2025.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, okay, go ahead, Councilor Grell.
Once again, thank you through your worship. The recent report that we approved for $270,000 for
The Hydro G?
drainage, pardon me,
The Hydro G,
here in Lansdowne.
that was the
portion-
urbanization.
Yes, the urbanization. Dave, in a couple of sentences, how does that fit in the capital? I could have asked that earlier, but just in the way this village is going to operate in its capital structure for water, wastewater, does that report define us going forward, or is that a whole different thing? Thank you.
Thank you. Through your worship, there are two separate items that we're dealing with right now. We have the water and the wastewater systems themselves, and then we have the condition of the road assets. So the condition of the road assets has been picked up in the roads as we go through the financial plan that Phil had provided. There were some high points in there, and those were the village roads that needed to be replaced. However, for us to replace the roads, we need to make sure that everything that's underneath the road has first been addressed. So that's why all the work that we've been doing in advance of this with the water and the sanitary systems to try to address that before we get to that point. Luckily for us, we have the same consultant working on both components of that. So they're talking the same language as we progress these projects forward.
And they have the information because they're doing the other study.
Correct.
Yeah.
Simply put, then, at the end of the day, that report, it could say a few things that we need to deal with from a capital point of view on water, wastewater lines, or it could be you're good to go. We're not quite sure on that. Is that correct? It's just one piece of the puzzle?
Yes, so the study, the EA study that we're doing for the water will give us the information for what's required currently with the storage facility. We're also looking at the overall system of the water at the same time with the Hydro G that we're undertaking. So it's 4 things that we're working on currently at the same time. So the Hydro G that we're looking at will tell us sort of what our aquifer can handle in terms of growth.
Mhm.
And then we will subsequently take a look at the future requirements for all of the developments that are developable lands for the village for full build out.
Including Lansdowne East, I think we call it.
Correct,
Including
including all open lands that we have currently in the village and
Mhm.
infilling. And that'll give us a better sense of, what amount of water we need to have at these different locations. So that'll address the water for us. We'll know if we have to run trunk mains in certain areas. And then that will feed into, well, similarly, we'll do the same thing with the sanitary system and say, this is what we need underground for the sanitary system. It may be nothing, it may be something in certain locations. But when we have all of this information compiled and we're undertaking the design of the village at the same time, we're able to say, when we rebuild this road, we need to replace these pipes under the ground because either they're undersized for future development or, they're coming to the end of their life, whatever those things are. And then as we put that out, all of that information has been included as one package. Thank you.
Okay. No other hands up, so we'll move forward with the capital part of water wastewater.
Madam Mayor. Yes, the proposed 2024 capital budget for water and wastewater. The total is $2.8 billion. The large majority of this is 2.75 for a water storage and distribution system upgrade. The remaining amounts, there is the additional budget for the water municipal class EA in addition to the carry forward. And then some small amounts for rehabilitation of wells and replacing some equipment, which is provided by Aqua, as well as the flow meter. The funding plan for this is some amounts will come through the water and wastewater, their respective reserve funds. The large project potential of the water storage and distribution system, we're proposing to fund that with CCBF. This year, we have about $825,000 available. So we would be using that for this project. And then going forward, previously you saw it in the tax funded side of capital, is that going forward after this project, it will be used more towards roads projects in the next 10 years. The remaining amount would then be funded potentially through debt. Now, I would say that in the capital or in the financial plan, which we'll get to, that does factor in servicing of debt. So when you see the ups and the downs in the reserve funds and the reserve fund transfers, that does take into consideration the servicing potentially of this 1.9 million in debt.
And that debt is serviced by the
By the
users.
user rates, yes.
Okay.
Not through the, now it does get included with our ARL calculations from a legislative point of view, but it is funded through the user rates and not through the tax base. So not the levy requirement. I don't know if there's any questions on this particular capital projects that Director Holiday
If-
could answer.
Well, I think it's also the fire chief, because this is directly related to the fire services review that we got almost 2 years ago now, 2021, where we were made aware that we did not have enough water reserve for fire flow. And then we had a subsequent fire in the area, which then proved the theory that was put in that report that we do not have enough storage for fire flow because we were out in 4 hours. I think we weren't out of water, but we had depleted what we could within 4 hours. So, so does anybody have any questions about the storage? What that looks like? Okay. Go ahead.
So the like the previous one, we do have a water and wastewater financial plan that does also look at the next 10 years of 2024 to 2023. So based on that, the total capital requirement identified is about $12.4 million, 4 million of that in water and about 8.3 in wastewater. The vast majority, as you can see on the slide there, is under what's referred to as the update, which was presented last year at budget time. And that is potential future projects as part of the Lansdowne projects and the growth required through that. If you look at the funding study, the vast majority of those things are funded. It says grant future opportunities. So what that is, that $9 million is, it's the intention of staff that through these studies, the EAs, that we can prepare and have the designs and everything ready. But we do need future grant opportunities, i.e. senior levels of government support to make this happen. Without that, it is not sustainable under the current rate structure, and we would drastically deplete our reserve funds. So we do want to have it shovel ready so that when there are future grant opportunities, we can act on them and have all our ducks in a row. But so I just want to make that clear. In addition to this 9 million, there was about just over 5 million in the 10-year tax funded side for the road part that would tie into this. So overall, there's about 15 million as part of the redesign and reconstruction potentially in Lansdowne that we will need senior level of government support to make happen.
And we have been laying that groundwork consistently and persistently for the last 12 months, I would say. For sure, our member is very much aware, but obviously we have to do all the legwork before we can put the shovel ready in front of him.
Yes, and the way a lot of the grant programs work now, they definitely do look favorably on you if you are shovel ready and have your design and ducks in a row, rather than applying and then doing all that. So it is important to do this legwork. Just a couple slides. We're
Go
almost there.
ahead, keep going. We got 10 minutes.
So these the next two slides are just on the reserve fund continuity. So the water reserve fund, if you look at it over the 10 years, it's projected to decrease from about $500,000 now down to about 300. And part of the reason for this is the projected debt servicing. Like I said before, the money that goes into the reserve is the residual amount left over after the user rates and the operating expenses. So when it is factoring in servicing that debt, that does mean less goes into the reserve. Now we still have positive reserve funds, but like I mentioned, for water, that does include, there was $1 million in potential future grant opportunities. Speaking on the sustainability, if we don't get those monies from senior levels of government, to service that $1 million would be about $65,000 annually in debt payments. If that was to happen, that would put in this 10-year period, starting in 2026 to 33, that would be an extra $520,000 pressure on the reserve funds, which would put us in a negative reserve fund balance. So it does look like there's money in there now, but if those projects, if we did have to fund that ourselves, it quickly becomes very unsustainable. So I just want to make sure that's clear, not to paint too dire of a picture, but wastewater, similar, over the 10 years, the reserve fund is actually projected to increase from about $600,000 now to about $1.5 million by the end of 2023. So without any projected debt servicing over this period, it does allow the reserve fund to grow in that contribution. That is a healthy reserve. But as what I hope is going clear, any major capital infrastructure, whether it's water or wastewater, is very expensive. So the reserve funds can build up over time, but as soon as you do one major project, it's quickly gone. And that's generally the experience. And similar, the wastewater from previously under the update had about $8 million in projected projects that we're hoping for a senior level of government support. That equivalent would be just over $500,000 a year to service and debt if we had to pay for that ourselves. Over this picture, that would be an extra $3.4 million from 26 to 33. So that reserve fund balance, if we had to go it alone, will quickly become. So it is a very tenuous position, and that is the balancing act. I would say, we touched on it earlier, but the next rate study is in 2025. So when we do that rate study, it does take everything into consideration: future growth, future capital requirements, our reserve fund balances at the time, and all of that will be baked into the next rate study going forward, starting in 2026. And that's it for water and wastewater capital. There's
Any questions about wastewater capital? Nope. Counselor, maybe go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, through you. Future development of the properties, how does that influence these possible projects and how we get funds from the developer or the residents through the billing? How would that reflect on these two water and wastewater potential projects that we need to do to service them?
We don't have any DCs that would fund that. So as of right now.
Correct. So part of a DC rate study, water and wastewater growth projects can be are eligible for DC rates. So that could help fund potentially the growth component of these projects, and then to build more capacity into the system. And then, I mean, more users does create a better economy of scale in the future, right? So,
Which has always been the challenge, I think, going forward, that because with that new development south of the tracks, it potentially doubles the amount of users if it was able to be built out fully. Any further comments or questions about water wastewater capital? Go ahead, Councillor Jameson.
Just so I'm clear on this, I mean, obviously we have a water system that's more or less self-supporting. Through your worship, if we're looking at 12 million over quite a long period of time, isn't it going to be probable? I mean, you've got 9 million in there. There's an expectation for other contributions and grants and so on. But is it not more realistic to consider how the township actually ends up financing this? Because other grants makes me think of the province, and I'm not all that confident we're going to see a lot of money out of them over the next 2 decades. So what's the alternative? Are we going to end up financing it as in the context of the broader township?
Through your worship. So the last rate study that was done, a lot of that $9 million that we're calling update projects, that wasn't included in the rate study projection. So that wasn't baked into the current user rates. As those come into focus through the EAs, we can build that into the next rate. Now, the rates that would be necessary to fully fund that would probably be not palatable. Trying to choose my words wisely. But in saying that, generally speaking, water and wastewater systems, as through the Safe Drinking Water Act, it's not specific in its language, but part of having a water license is we must have a sustainable financial plan. And the financial plan that gets passed by council through the rate study must show that we can support the water and wastewater system to maintain our drinking water license. So whether that plan includes other sources from the tax side or not, that's council's decision. But traditionally speaking, water and wastewater systems, or the financial plan, has to account for all the capital costs and the operating costs of that system in order to meet that legislative requirement.
Was it, maybe the other thing, just, you already touched on it today. You were allocating CCIA.
Yeah, CCBF, the
CCBF.
gas
I always
tax.
get OSIF and CCBF involved. So rather than it coming out of the tax base and the tax levy, we're using the government grant funding instead of putting it into road network improvements, that funding, it's going into this water, correct? So it's not directly coming out of the levy, but it's affecting other projects. Anyways, I'm not trying, I know what you're trying to get at, and I understand your hesitancy about the rest of the tax base potentially funding this. But that's how.
I would just say in the 10-year financial plans, there is CCBF for this year for that specific project, but
Right.
going forward, starting in 2025, for the rest of the 9 years, the CCBF is all planned to be spent on the
Roads.
tax-sided side in the road network.
Yeah.
That's how the plan is designed, but it can be used on.
Right, go ahead, James.
I get it. I just, and I don't want to be misunderstood.
Okay.
Because there's a certain point where, once again, in the context of an economic development engine, the water system is going to have to be at a certain level of function in order to get those houses built, in order to ensure that the standing pipe and everything else are up to scratch. So there can be an argument you bring to councillors that live elsewhere that puts that case on the table. Not very popular, I know, but I mean, I'm on a short leash.
We'll fight
here.
that fight when it comes to,
Exactly,
when it
yeah.
comes to that
Yeah.
day. Okay, further comments or questions about water, wastewater? Councillor Gurel?
I can't help myself. I got to say it. There's 91 residential units planned down there that the system can handle. It's going to be a while before there are 91 residences built down there. I think we're covered for a while.
It's all, we'll pick that for, we'll kick that can down the road. As we've been trying not to do that anymore. I don't see any other hands up in regards to this, so I'm gonna let Phil have the last word. There's a couple more slides and then I think
Just a
we're
couple
good.
more slides through there. So the next slide, actually, Councilor Gurel kind of
Oh.
touched on it right at the very beginning.
Wait, I'm gonna call the question on this. Sorry. The motion that was on the floor was in regards to the draft water, wastewater operating capital budgets. And that the last thing being the council approves the increases to the water, wastewater rates in accordance with the rate study effective for the January billing cycle. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it is carried. Thank you. Sorry, you can say your last words now.
Wrapping up, I swear. So I always like to include this slide, and Councilor Correll kind of touched on it earlier, I think right at the beginning, but the budget really is a policy document. And we don't just approve a budget and then we go away and staff does whatever they want. To implement many of the expenditures and in the budget, additional staff reports, council reports, bylaws, all that will be brought back to council. So I do just want to reiterate that it's not just carte blanche. We'll have to come back and get many, many more council's approval to do many of the things that we're asking for through the budget. So I do always like to remind it, and the people watching at home that as well. So, and then there's just the next steps. I think we talked about this, recommendations at committee of the whole, and then if all goes well, we would officially adopt it through bylaw at the January 16th council. That's the end of the slides.
So just as an aside for everybody's interest, because I know that it keeps you up at night in regards to the county budget. I haven't got my binder yet. I won't get it till probably next week sometime. Our first meeting is committee of the whole January the 10th. I believe. Anyways, it's if we've got county budget approved by March, I would be shocked. Well, it's a significant increase, as you saw in our budget document, the estimate that was put in there. It's a significant increase because the county has done their asset management plan. However, it is certainly not as robust as what we have been dealing with here. And they are just now trying to get on the citywide platform, which will give them the reports and the tools that they need to get the reports that we deal with at these budgeting things. So I need you to pray for me to get me through some of these budgeting meetings because I also have joint services, which is something a little bit different with the separated municipalities. But just wanted to give you that little heads up so that you know that as soon as I know what the official rate is going to be from the county, I will be sure to let everyone here know, as well as our treasurer, because that obviously affects the overall tax rate. But we deal with our budget based on what we need for our budget, not what somebody else needs in their budget. So, okay, CAO.
Thank you, Worship. Just like to recognize that sitting in today with us is Deputy Treasurer Jessica Thane and IT Manager Tom Ryle, who are here in case there were any questions that they needed to address. And thank you both. And also from the CAO's perspective, thank you to staff for all the work that went into this document. And thank you to council who took the time to carefully read it and ask questions. And it's one thing to spend months and months developing a document. And it's kind of disheartening when you realize that people don't look at it. But council does look at the budget very carefully, and we really do appreciate all the questions. So thank you very much.
Stole a little bit of my thunder. I was going to actually say on behalf of council, thank you to all the members of senior management and everyone else who helps feed into this document. Feel like I'm kicking county here, but one of my biggest complaints at the county is the budget binder. It is a very difficult read. And this year, Phil, the big calculator must have done something because it worked. You really forgot to bring it. It hangs with pride in his office. Thank you, Councillor Jameson, for spying it and ensuring that he had it. But I think if you were to look at many other municipal taxation budget binders, they would not be as easily digested as the one that we've seen here today. So thank you very much, because we know that that in its own self is a feat. So thank you to all the hard work, to all those who contributed, but also for making our jobs a little bit easier. So thank you very much, Phil. So I think, and there's another more motion at hand, moved by Councillor Kelman, seconded by Councillor Burrell, that 3 readings and final passage be granted to bylaw number 23-079 be a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the corporation, the township of Leeds and the Thousand Islands at its December 14th council budget meeting. All those in favor? All those opposed? And it's carried. Any other final comments before I put the adjournment up? Seeing none, motion, Counselor Kelman, seconded by Counselor Growl, that council adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? And we're carried.